Here comes Bernie Sanders. There is a new poll out uh, that shows that, and this is a morning consult tracking poll, by the way. This is strictly a Democratic primary poll on some of the early states: Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Bernie Sanders is now in second place. He is now at 23%, getting a massive 9-point lead since October, and is now just 3 percentage points behind Joe Biden. So now that same survey, of course, found more good news for Senator Sanders. He has actually by far the most highest favorable ratings in the entire field. 75% of Democratic primary voters have a favorable view of Senator Bernie Sanders. So again, very interesting. Oh, now wait a minute. The Bernie Sanders so unlikable. I mean, he's never smiles, and around women especially. Well, he makes their skin crawl, and they can't figure out why. And yet, 75% of Democratic primary voters in the entire field. By the way, I'm not just talking about like Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina and Nevada. No, we're talking the whole field. The most positive. Why? It's because Democratic primary voters are not buying the narrative that Bernie Sanders is so grumpy and unlikable. No, that's what you hear on MSNBC. It's what you hear constantly on panel after panel on MSNBC. Grumpy, that always yelling at people. No. No, if you actually listen and go to his rallies, which I have, right? He makes jokes. He has fun, but he also talks about the real serious issues. And so, again, if you actually listen to him and listen to his message and look at his record, you can't help but like this guy. And so, this is great news, especially in these early primary states. Which look, South Carolina is actually one of the most important, as well as Nevada. Again, you can look at Iowa and New Hampshire since they're the first lead up, but you can look at it and say, look, a lot of white people, right? They don't really matter as much when it comes to building a broad coalition where you need African American voters. Well, now, if you look at South Carolina and Nevada, these are very diverse states. And if Bernie Sanders does incredibly well there in those two states, especially when it comes to African American voters, well then he's doing a really good job at recreating the Obama coalition that helped President Obama win. And so that's really, really good. It's great polling to see. Again, we haven't actually got into primary voting or caucuses yet, but we're getting closer and closer. And so it's interesting to see how the polling continues to evolve, how Bernie Sanders continues to rise. Biden continues to either stay still or fall. And then, of course, you've had Elizabeth Warren losing her support. Her September surge is over, by the way. And so I guess, look, that's what happens when you're not as clear on Medicare for All, why she split her bill up into two different parts. First, creating a public option, and then starting a second fight for Medicare for All. I don't think that's the right way to do things. I don't think that's the best way to do things because you have to worry about the political calculus. And it makes it seem like she's not really as in favor of Medicare for All as she claims. And she's always kind of waffled on that. And there's not a lot of trust there. Whereas Bernie Sanders, you can look at him and look, even if you're not, buying that thing about Elizabeth Warren, even if you think, no, she is in favor of Medicare for All, you still can't look at Bernie Sanders and say, but he's been consistent the entire time. And that's one reason I think a lot of people do really like Senator Sanders. That I know that's certainly one of the reasons that I like Bernie Sanders better than anyone else, because he has been consistent, and this is interesting because when you look at old videos that since Buttigieg has really started to rise in the polls as strong fourth, right? And even, getting first for a while in these early state polls, well, he's been vetted. And there have been videos that come out against Buttigieg showing that he is incredibly conservative and that he likes to echo a lot of right wing talking points. Whereas whenever a video comes out about Bernie Sanders, usually it's pretty good because he's saying the same things that he's been saying before. And so a lot of that works in his favor, not so much in favor of the other candidates. Joe Biden has seen that. Buttigieg has seen that. And so those have been very detrimental to those two Democrats' campaign. Now, aside from old videos and stuff, let's talk more about polling, right? And not just polling, but, for example, some of the advantages that Sanders' campaign currently has. Now, according to the polling, this is a Real Clear Politics polling average. Bernie Sanders is now in a solid second place, overtaking Elizabeth Warren and catching up to Joe Biden. Very important. Now, as far as metrics goes, fundraising, he's doing excellent on fundraising. He leads in small dollar donations. Not only that, but in volunteers and when it comes to the early states. And in fact, in some of these early states, Sanders supporters have knocked on over 22,000 doors just in the past weekend. That shows a very dedicated base of volunteers and supporters, and of course, people that are giving recurring donations. Now, the Democratic establishment wants us to think that Bernie Sanders can't possibly win, and wants, of course, to keep people in line by pushing the narrative that only Joe Biden can beat Trump. Laughable. Now, it's gotten so bad, right? There's a story that just came out earlier today where, from Politico, that talked about how Barack Obama was actually going to come out if Bernie Sanders is shown to be running away with the thing, right, with the nomination, that Barack Obama himself would come out and speak against Bernie Sanders. Normally, he says, I'm not going to get involved with the Democratic primary, not interested. I'm going to let this thing play out. That is unless Bernie Sanders takes the lead, then I will personally come out and go after Bernie Sanders. That is absolutely unprecedented, and it really shows you who the Democratic establishment is scared of, is afraid of. They're not afraid of Elizabeth Warren. I know they say it all the time, it can't be Elizabeth Warren, can't be Elizabeth Warren. No. They are afraid of Bernie Sanders. So much so that they will, and they describe this in the article, Obama as being a booming microphone, right? Has a booming voice in the Democratic Party and should only be reserved for the most dire circumstance. Well, the dire circumstance for them is Bernie Sanders winning the Democratic primary. And so that is the only situation in that article where he said that Obama, according to aides, would actually come and speak out during the Democratic primary. That's disastrous. It's what, it's what a lot of progressives have been warning about, right? That they would rather have Donald Trump than have a real progressive win in 2020. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.